So I'm Shannon Sims from Sims Cattle Company in McFadden, and
I'm Melinda Sims, Shannon's wife.
we operate a cow-calf operation plus 300 head of stockers there with my family, my mom and dad, Scott and April, and our two kids, Kagan and Gentry. And then my grandpa, Don, and his wife, Cheryl, are also on the place for part of the year. So we're going to talk about basically everything we do, which can be broken down into three parts. We have a people component, a landscape component, and a financial component. And our message is really how those all tie together, and you can't have one without the other.
Well, I think people usually get focused on one component, and you really can't have a functioning business without all the components functioning together. And so we really want to drive home that you have to encompass everything and look holistically at your operation.
All right, so have we made a difference? Is all this stuff that we've been doing, back to that conversation, besides the monitoring and meeting our goals, we've got some other evidence that what we're doing is working for us. First of which is our reservoirs are all dry. I don't know what you guys call them here, dirt tanks, dirt ponds, reservoirs. Ours, within the first 5 years, they all dried up. We didn't have less rainfall or anything like that. What was happening is instead of that rainfall hitting the ground, running off down the gullies into the reservoirs, it was going into the soil. What I'd really like to see is now starting to fill those reservoirs from the bottom up. We haven't gotten there yet. I'm confident we will. It's something to keep in mind. I've seen some guys go into a high-intensity, short-duration grazing program without having water developed ahead of time, and it's a wreck. It's a problem because you do capture more water, but then you've got to have something to water the livestock. Our cows eat weeds. Our cows will eat anything. This happened with a project we did with Wyoming Game and Fish to try to enhance some elk habitat on an adjoining habitat management area. When we got there, honestly, it was a mismanagement area. It was an old ranch that had just been let go. They were going to re-native it, I guess. And hay meadows were just overgrown with wild mustard and wild iris. That was pretty much what was growing there in some red dirt. And so we came in with cows. We were putting 300 head of cows on 20 acres of that for a half a day with some, it was certified weed-free hay, but I think it was certified weed-free cattail. But we'd put that down so they could trample it in. And within 2 or 3 years, we had rebuilt those, and we had alfalfa. We were using a real simple, inexpensive seed mix. There was a couple of wheat grasses, an alfalfa, a couple others, maybe some Timothy. Anyway, we had nice stands come back in there. But in the meantime, our cows had learned that they could eat wild iris. They'd clip it. They never really did develop a taste for wild mustard. A lot of these pastures had white top in it, and our cows would, whenever we'd move them, they would run into a new pasture, run right over the top of some of this nice vegetation that we had created and hit a patch of white top. And I thought, man, what are we doing wrong? There's got to be a mineral deficiency or something. And so the game and fish wildlife biologist and I got together and we took samples of all of these, or of white top, and sent it into the lab and got a full analysis done. And the results came back and we looked at all the minerals and everything was in balance. There was nothing there. But it was 24% crude protein. Once our cows learned that it was like eating alfalfa, they go to it. And we're now done with that project. We moved off of it, and our cows will still go to weeds. They'll also go to larkspur. There was pastures when Dad Nolan first started breaking our pastures into these half-section pie-shaped pastures that were just purple with larkspur. And they took the chance they'd heard. They kicked 300 head of cows in there for 3 days, moved them back out, and never lost a cow because every animal was getting a little bit, but no animal was getting a toxic amount. And now you go into those pastures, and there's no purple. We thought we had eliminated larkspur, but what's happening is the cows are going in and clipping it off. Again, 20% crude protein. They're clipping it off. We still have larkspur plants down in that sagebrush, but they just keep it mowed off. So it doesn't look like we have it anymore. This is where we've really made a difference. In 2002, we had the first drought to ever hit McFadden came through. Because prior to that, every time it would get a little bit dry, my grandpa would talk about the drought of 1954. And how bad it was, and then it would start raining, and that was our drought plan for a long time, was get Grandpa to talk about 1954, which nobody remembered, and make it rain. In 2002, I think he forgot to talk about 54, because it didn't rain. We ended up, I feel like we didn't overgraze, but we severely grazed a lot of our pastures. And even with that, we had to sell 110 head of cows. We had to destock. Along about that same time, remember I was telling you about the wind turbines coming in. We learned that we should be setting off a third of our pastures in deferment. And in 2014, we had those pastures, and we were able to go in and use them, not have to sell any cattle off. I went back and did the math, and if we had sold 17% of the cow herd in 2012 and 2013 during that second drought, it would have cost us $130,000. But because we had that forage in reserve, we were able to hold on to that cash. To me, that's really what it comes down to. Morgan talked about it this morning. All these production numbers are great, but those are the numbers that keep us in business. So yeah, we have a drought plan. It looks fuzzy from here. Maybe you guys can see it, but up here, that would be in 2010. We had a fairly normal year. This is 2012, I believe, where we had 10.95 inches of precip, and most of that came late in the year, like September. And then by 2015, that's the same pasture. Where am I? That's the same pasture, and it's pretty well recovered. But in 2012, we had very little to turn out on. But remember, I just told you that we held on to the entire cow herd because we had a third more property to graze on. So we write a drought plan. The first part of that drought plan is, again, we rest a third of the uplands. And that does several things for us. We've got a bunch of old feed in a third of those pastures that we'll turn out into early the following year after rest and fills up the rumen. But also, we've got a third of pastures set aside that if we get into a bad drought, we can use those. So they're not just locked in that we won't use them. We will use every pasture in a drought year so that we don't have to destock. Because again, that made us $130,000 in 2014. We have, the second part of our drought plan is that we're going to keep a year's worth of hay in reserve. I'm not sure how crazy I am about that plan. Yeah, a year's worth of hay in reserve, we can hold the cow herd together. But if nature's not providing enough moisture to grow feed and we're just out there putting more feed on top of it, cows are still going to be grazing whatever's there. I feel like we could set ourselves up to prolong the drought by just pounding down what plants are growing there. Not sure about that one. The third part of our plan is that we can rotate through the pastures faster and graze multiple times. So in our country, we have no warm season grasses. Well, we have blue grama. That is our one warm season grass, and it's not much. Everything else is cool season grasses. And so one time through a pasture is pretty standard in our country. You know, we're talking about 800 days of deferment. If we're not doing 800 days, it's 365 days of deferment. But in these tough years, we can go into a pasture instead of for 3 days, we'll go in for 1 day and just move as fast as we can. We get monsoonal rains in July and August. And a lot of times when we get into an early dry year like we had in 2002, 2012, 2013, we will get late moisture, and those pastures will respond. They'll bounce back up. And then we can come through with the cows again and graze that regrowth and maybe get another day or two. So you see how the math works out here. We're getting 2 days instead of 3, but we're doing it on a third more property. We can hold the cow herd together. We're not pounding down the forage that's available. We've insulated ourselves. If all that falls through, then it's time to destock. And I think the older I get, the more I think the destock needs to move up the list a little bit more. We might need to do that sooner. But if we do get into a situation where we have to destock, our stockers are the first to go. They're young, they're easily transported, they're easy to put on a truck and get them out of there. We've still got the factory in place, and so they'll be the first to go. We have that written down. Everybody knows what we're going to do when we get into a bad drought. The next thing to go is the cows on the place that are just getting a free ride, right? The old cows that don't raise a very good calf, the small cows that are raising a small calf, just the junk. We have those identified in this spreadsheet. Now, I'm not telling anybody that you should tag every cow and keep track of them. It does work for us. I know every cow and what she's produced in her lifetime. Some cows are better than others. We can find that lower end and get them out of there before we get into a bad drought situation. And then after that, we'll use production records. And so did she calve in the first cycle for the majority of her productive life, things like that. So yeah, now it's the the unfun part?
I think it's the fun part. We're going to switch gears. We talk about all of these land management tools, but if you don't have a business management tool, you're going to end up like that gentleman that Shanon talked about at the beginning, where he went out and he did all these land management changes and then went broke. You have to be able to manage your farm or ranch as a business. We have kind of 6 key principles that we use to operate a family business because, as most of you know, operating a business is hard. Operating a family business is really hard. And so the first one on the top left there is keeping the family out of the business so that we can keep the business in the family. And what I mean by that is our personal opinions about situations, or if I'm mad at Shanon someday, I don't make a business decision based on that. I don't make something that's a financial decision that's going to affect everybody based on my emotions. If he is having a hard time getting along with his dad, for example, business decisions are not based on that because it's bigger than that. It's bigger than our emotions on any certain day. The second principle is to place people in their area of expertise and allow them to work. So, for example, Shanon is really good at the genetic part of our cow herd. He loves to mate the cows. He loves to know all the EPDs. And so we let him do that, and we trust his decisions. He will come back to all of us as a team and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is why, but we don't question his every move on it. My area of expertise happens to be in business and doing the financial records. I really thrive in that area. His dad is excellent in anything that is related vet-wise. He's our preg checker. He diagnoses any sick calves. That's what he loves to do. But the important part of that also is that any one of us is replaceable. Shanon has done all of this talking on the grazing. I can turn around and give the same talk because I'm just as familiar with it. He knows all of the financials just as well as I do, even though I'm the one writing the checks. The next principle is that everybody is paid a fair wage, and wages are equitable, not equal. So everybody on the ranch is either paid a salary or an hourly wage, and that's from my 13-year-old daughter all the way up to his dad. And when I say that they're equitable and not equal, for example, his mom and I both earn a salary. Her salary happens to be quite a bit more than mine, even though on an hourly basis, I'm probably doing more work than her. She's in her 60s. I don't expect her to be out there all the time. But her financial security is really important to us. We want them to be comfortable in their retirement. Shanon and I are just fine on the money that we're earning. I don't have to be paid the same wage as her, and I understand that, and I'm comfortable with it. Plus, her knowledge and her expertise and her years of experience are worth something to us. And so we want to, in a way, thank her for all of her time. The next one is planning family time. Moving cows with your kids is not family time. Sometimes it can be fun, but sometimes those kids come away from that like, oh my gosh, dad just screamed at all of us, or mom's mad at all of us. What did we do wrong? That's not quality family time. That is work time. So we make an extra effort to plan a family vacation or take the kids to the movies or make sure that we're going to all of their basketball games, because it's important for us to not only show them that we're not just the ranch. We're people besides the ranch. We have personalities that isn't just made up of how we run the cows. And we want to get to know them as the people that they are, because they may or may not come back to the ranch. It's not something that we want forced on them. We want them to want to come back. But I don't want the ranch to be their entire identity. The fifth principle is keeping financial records. You have to be professional about this. A shoebox isn't a good place to keep your financial records. We use QuickBooks a lot. We do hire an accountant. And it holds yourself accountable. And if you are constantly keeping those records and keeping track of what you're doing, you're going to be more professional in your business, and I think you should hold yourself to that high standard. You hold any other business in town to a high standard of how to operate as a business. A ranch should be the exact same way. Our sixth principle is strategy meetings. Strategy meetings are an idea that we gain from Roland Cruz and also Dallas Mount, who is the new owner of the
Ranch Management Consultants.
Thank you.
Ranching for Profit School.
We had been talking with both of those guys and Aaron Berger about things that we can improve. And they said, why don't you try to do a strategy meeting? and they kind of give us a guideline for what this would look like. And for us, at this point, during busy times of the year, we do tend to have less strategy meetings. During slower times, we end up having more because we have more time to plan for them. But the strategy meeting, first and foremost, is held in a neutral area. We're not at Shannon's mom's kitchen table, or we're not at my house. We're somewhere where everybody feels equally comfortable. We all bring issues that are important, pertinent to everybody, and need maybe input from everybody to these meetings. If you know a gate needs closed, go close the gate. That's not something that you bring to the meeting. But if you're thinking, hey, I think we need a new ATV, that's kind of a big decision. Let's bring that to the meeting. Or, hey, I want to switch up the vaccine program. That's something that everybody needs input on. So our meetings are structured like this. We come in, we have a calendar, we go through the calendar because, like Shanon said, all of us have a lot of obligations. So we lay out when we're going to be gone, when we're going to be home, so that we do know that all of our bases are covered. And then we go through maybe the past tasks that we were assigned or we volunteer for. And on that calendar, we write down who was in charge of each task, the timeline that they were supposed to get it done by, and then basically we check it off. You know, Shanon, did you get the water system drained, and are there any issues with it? Well, no, I didn't get it drained because of X. And it holds people accountable because as the kids on the place, how do you hold your parents accountable? That's kind of an uncomfortable situation, but that takes being uncomfortable out of the equation.
Especially if you know my mother. It could be very uncomfortable to try to tell her what to do. Yes.
So then we all go around and we each have an equal opportunity to bring forth, you know, the issues or the problems or ideas that we have at that point, and everybody has their time to speak uninterrupted. And it's really given everybody a voice because, as he said, sometimes it can be hard to tell his mom what to do, but it can also be hard to get her to explain how she's feeling about something. And so she feels very comfortable opening up because she knows she's not going to be interrupted and that her opinion is valued there.
So yeah, one of my favorite things to come out of these strategy meetings is Melinda had been reading some research out of Canada, I believe, where they found that it takes 10 months for a calf's rumen villi to fully develop to where they can use forage. You know, so we're weaning calves at 6-7 months, but they're really not developed. This is the same time that the owners of the adjacent ranch had come to us and asked if we were interested in leasing it. And so she brought this to the meeting like, hey, what if we were to just leave those heifer calves on the cows for an additional 3 months? We don't have to buy new cows in to take on this new place. We've used the forage more efficiently. The calves should be able to forage more efficiently. They've learned how to be cows in our environment. Anyway, she brought this to the meeting. We said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do some more research. Everybody took a little piece, went back, researched it. We came back a week later, met. What that ultimately ended up doing is took an $80,000 expense and reduced it to about a $25,000 expense. And I'll get more into the details of that here after a bit. But that's the power of these meetings where everybody just feels comfortable to come with an idea. You know, Melinda is, as somebody new to ranching, she didn't grow up doing this. As somebody new to the family, could very easily feel like she has no say. But these meetings have given everybody a platform to speak from.
So another tool that we use extensively is a budget. The budget started out as something that our lender would require in order for us to get funds for that year. And that's exactly what we used it for. We used it to get money. And now, and we would make the budget and then just set it aside. And at the end of the year, we'd go, did we meet it? Oh, whoops, we went over. Well, you have no control then. And now we're using it as a tool to make money because, like Shanon had touched on earlier, we have our income minus our profit, that is the first expense that we take out, equals our expenses. So we know exactly how much money that we have or that we're comfortable spending on expenses. And that puts the power back in your hands. We all feel like we're, you know, powerless to the weather, to the markets. Well, you can take some control back by saying, no, I'm only going to spend this much on expenses. We look at this budget at least monthly now. After I get all of the bills paid every month, those totals are put in there, and it's compared to last year's totals, it's compared to what we budgeted for that month, and we're using it as a tool every month to see, are we on track? And that gives you a lot more power too, because you're only a month into it, say, and oh, I spent too much in this area, rather than 12 months into it before you realize, wow, we really overspent. Another tool that we have is a balance sheet. A balance sheet is simply just a snapshot of your business at a certain time. I think you can get in over your head, and it can give you a false sense of security if you're actually using it to say, if you're making money or not, because you can get into an unbalanced situation of being asset rich and cash poor. Your balance sheet might look really awesome and you show growth, but none of that growth is in your actual cash situation. So I think it's a good tool to be able to monitor that. It's also a really good tool to see how your business is growing. We personally like to see about 8% business growth. We kind of try to balance that with our profit expectations that we lay out. But ultimately, it is just a snapshot in time just to see where you're at on a certain day.
Okay, enterprise analysis. And I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with breaking your business down into enterprises. For us, it's not just a ranch. It's not the ranch. Our ranch is made up of a cow-calf component, a hay component. We grow our own hay, a custom grazing component. We have cattle that we run for outside people, a stocker component, and then we also raise our own bulls. We break our business down into all of these different enterprises, and each one has to stand on its own, okay? So the spreadsheet here, this first column, and I hate this, is cow-calf. And when you get down here, we break all the numbers out. So we're charging those cows a grazing fee. We're charging them opportunity cost of the hay, right? So we're not charging them what it costs us to put it up. We're charging it what we could have sold that hay to the next guy for. So I don't know, I don't have the titles on there. I think it was around $125 a ton that year. We're charging all the vaccines, everything that goes into that cow, as if somebody besides us were running them. In this particular year, we lost $11,000 on the cow herd. Right next door is the hay income. We made money on the hay. Right next door is the custom grazing, and so we're leasing the ranch for X number of dollars. What could we sell that to the next guy for? In our country, $30 to $35 for a cow-calf pair is pretty decent, pretty average. Let's see, I think that's what I charged this at. And so the custom grazing, probably in this 1 year, that's what we should have been doing, was selling our grass to somebody else. We're not going to make a decision based on 1 year, because the next year after this, the cow-calf was the place to be. The hay had flipped. That wasn't such a good income. But if you're doing this year after year after year, you're going to find those trends. And I was talking to Logan Pribino. I don't know if anybody listens to Working Cows podcast, but he was up and we were talking about this, and he goes, "You're in yearling country. Why do you have these cows?" I'm like, well, obviously I didn't show him this one. But I can't make it pencil to run yearlings. And he's right. We're a short growing season. We are short grass that's just packed with nutrients. Those yearlings should explode. But I can't make it work. But I know exactly how to answer Logan when he brings this up, because we have these numbers. Okay, so what kind of decisions have we made because of enterprise analysis? And these first four kind of all tie together. So cull cows. We just got done preg testing our cows. We're about 86% pregnant, so we've got 14% of the herd that we just go to town with now. Or what do we do? At the same time, we've got a bunch of heifer calves we want to leave on the cows. So do we go with those calves out of the open cows? What do we do? At Torrington Livestock Markets, the market just increases from November until about mid-February on an open cow. We can put some weight on her. We can wait for the markets to come up. She can raise a calf for us, so we don't have to send that calf to feed to grow. we're money ahead to hold on to that cull for the winter. Again, wean calves at 9 to 10 months. We were taking our 130 head of what we thought were our best heifers, taking them off the cow in September, October, sending them to a lot to be developed as replacement females, shipping them back over, freight's, $5 a loaded mile, shipping them back over to McFadden, AIing them off of green grass, getting incredible results, 94, 95% breed up, and then they'd have to do it over again the next year in our climate. They didn't get to go to Torrington and eat silage, and they fell out. They fell out fast, and we had a lot of money into them that we weren't getting back out when they fell out. Now we are, and that was, okay, so to send them to the feedlot, I think it was costing us $80,000, just a hair over $80,000. We flipped that to weaning them at 9 to 10 months at home off of the cow. So that would be in like February, 1st of March. We're weaning that calf. We're keeping all 300 heifer calves at the ranch. We're feeding their open mothers up. We're feeding their bred mothers up. When they're weaned off, then we feed them a ration to gain a half pound a day. That's what you have to gain to keep a calf healthy, right? So that's what we're shooting for. So they go through March and April at a half pound a gain. Once we get into May, green grass is coming and they can just explode. They start gaining probably over 2 pounds per head per day. That winter expense has gone from $80,000 to last year it cost us $20,250 in supplemental protein to the cows and to the calves to get them to that point. And then once we've got them to that point, instead of breeding for 60 days, we'll breed them for 30 days. Actually, this year it was 27 days. So the 10th of July, we kicked the bulls in on those heifers, and we let nature or God or whatever you believe in, or the bulls, we let them decide who is going to be a cow on our ranch. And so we're getting a 70% breed up, 69.8 this year, which is terrible. You go talk to the neighbors like, yeah, we got a 70% breed up on the heifers, and they think you're crazy because you should be getting 95. Everybody knows that. But they're the ones that were able to go through our system without any additional inputs and get bred in one cycle, essentially. They're cows that fit our environment. Back to the goal of we want an animal that fits our environment, not adapt our environment to our cows. We don't AI heifers anymore. My dad and grandpa started AIing cows and heifers in 1975. So they had glass ampules. They were using dry ice to thaw. It was crazy what they did. 30 days of AIing. That was a hard one to let go of. But what we were finding is trying to make it an efficient time breeding operation to where we weren't spending 30 days with the heifers. We were way better off to just kick the bulls in and let them decide for us. Again, back to the enterprise analysis, it did not pay to go buy a $10 cedar, a $2 shot of prostaglandin, 2 more $2 shots of GnRH, plus a straw of semen to put into them. It just did not work. Because we broke this down into an enterprise, we knew that. Swath grazing, windrow grazing, we call it windrow grazing. You guys are familiar with that, right? Instead of rolling it up into a bale, you just leave it on the ground. We have a lot of elk in our country. I talked about elk earlier. We have a herd of about 180 head that will just move in to the hay meadows in a tough winter. All the hillsides snow up, and they don't have any of that range grazing. They just move in, they'll camp out. And we'll lose, 10 to 15% of our hay crop to those elk, and it's frustrating to watch. But when you run the numbers, that 10 to 15% loss is still a lot cheaper than running it through a baler or hiring somebody to come make bales for us. If we were just worried about elk, we would be spending more money. But because we know our numbers and we sit down and we've run them, we're making more money feeding some of the game and fish elk. And my son loves hunting. He's got a nice 6x6 on the wall. That pays dividends as well to keep him there. I talked about, holding rebreeds. Okay, I told you guys we wanted to be a platform for conversation, not just tell you how we do things right. In 2016, we did everything wrong. We should have been supplementing cows during the summer. We didn't. We ended up 70% preg rate on our cows. And what do? You throw the cows, all the opens on the truck so you don't have to feed them hay. Well, that particular year, hay was cheap. We didn't have enough to feed them all the way through, but hay was cheap to buy in, feed those open cows, for an entire winter, kick the bulls back in with them so they'd calve March and April when all the farmers in Torrington want to calve, and ship those out of there. We made $200 a head on open cows that year just because we ran the numbers. It's always there. You just have to look at the markets. Yeah, we've remained primarily cow-calf because that's still what works in our area. I am sure that it's right around the bend that it's going to be cheaper for us to buy yearlings in, grow them out, and sell them. But so far, I can't make the numbers work. We AI cows and raise our own bulls. And so this kind of goes back to finding cows that work in our environment too. It's a lot cheaper for us to buy a $25 straw of semen and put in a cow than it is to go buy a $5,000 bull from outside and bring him in. We can raise our own. We can also control which cows we're raising those out of. So the best cows on the place are those 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old cows that have performed in our herd. Put a straw of semen from the best bulls in the world in her, we've got a pretty incredible bull to clean up the rest of the herd with. Calve in May, we were talking about this earlier. We used to calve in March and April, and everybody's telling us you need to calve later. And I thought they were talking about the weather, because you freeze calves, you have to have hot boxes, you have to do all that stuff, and like, it doesn't make any difference, because in May, I've seen, 18 inches of snow on the ground. You have to have hot boxes. You have to be out with the cows. You have to be doing it. It finally came around to where it is not the weather. It's the nutrition on the cows. So we're better off to calve in May because we're matching the nutrient requirements, right? You're nodding. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So the April 1st calving is the red line. And see where we move into the white? We don't have enough crude protein in our feed to get those cows bred at that point. And then on the backside, calving June 1st is that black line that's in the white. We don't have enough protein in the grass to get our cows bred. So we're calving May 1st, not because it's easier on us, not because it's better weather, but because that's the forage that fits our cows. So if we calve early, we're dumping a lot of protein in those cows so that they can raise a healthy calf. If we calve later, we're dumping protein in those cows so that they can conceive. And I think, this is very specific to our production, forage production on the ranch and the quality of the grass. But I think everybody needs to have one of these graphs because it's going to be different for my neighbor. But you also have to have a graph for what you value as an individual, because it might be that it's worth it to you to calve in April, spend that extra feed, spend that extra time because you have some other quality of life challenge on the backside. And that's where we try to tie everything back together. It's about the whole system. It's not just about one component. It's not about the grazing. It's not about the feed quality. It's about the people and the goals of the operation to really create a successful, meaningful business. Yeah. So I think we're kind of ahead of schedule.
Go ahead and click to the last slide, Shannon. This is all of our contact information. We do have a website, www.simscattlecompany.com. Any of you are welcome to call either Shannon or I at any time or email us. We're also on Facebook at Sims Cattle Company. I try to post every couple of days just an update of what we're doing. I'm also trying to reach the public that doesn't understand ranching and trying to kind of bridge that gap between people understanding where their food comes from and people who don't understand.
So yeah, I think we've got time for questions.
I also want to throw in there, I kind of screwed up on some of my information. Someone had asked, our cows are an Angus base, so we try to run 50% Angus, 25% Calve, 25% Simmental, and get that three-way cross. The other thing is, like Shannon said, when we're weaning heifers at 10 months of age, they're weighing a whopping 475 pounds. They're not big heifers, but they sure have a lot of potential to grow. Our steer calves we're selling off the cow in October at 400 to 425 pounds. Again, not anything we're going to brag about in the coffee shop, but it's making us money.
Here, hold on. Keep track of your weights on your cows and your calves to see how those cows are working for you with that calf. to make the cow produce for you the best calf it can?
Yeah, so the question was, do we keep track of weights on the cow and keep track of weights on the calf so that we can make sure the cow is working for us? For several years we did. We still keep track of weights on the cows. We quit weighing individual calves just because it wasn't worth our time and the stress through the chute. But that's, you remember the destocking slide where I had the production numbers on the cows? All that was the cow's weight based again or indexed against average so that we know how much additional feed we're putting into her or how much less feed we're putting into her against the value of the calf that she raised. So how much is it worth indexed against average or below average? Add those two numbers together, the one that is the smallest cow with the biggest calf wins, right? What we found is really the cow that calves the earliest is the one that's making us money. There's just not that much genetic potential out there to really make a big difference that way compared to when she calves. So now when we start to destock, it's going to be cows that calve late in that second or third cycle, year in and year out. Those will be the ones to go. Those are also your lightest calves.
That's something we're striving towards too, is also having a long breeding season and a short calving season. We're not quite there yet. We're hoping that we'll get there with the numbers of heifers that we keep getting bred, that we can go ahead and cull all those later calving cows and let somebody else calve them out.
When you're picking replacement heifers, describe what that, and you're looking at a pen full of heifers. Describe a replacement heifer that you would consider for your herd.
Got it.
Describe what it looks like.
Pregnant.
No, the replacement heifer, the ones you're going to put in to get pregnant.
They all get a chance. Every single calf gets a chance to be bred, and if she's pregnant, she stays.
Yeah, I get that, but if you picked one out.
But my point is, we've been wrong for so long.
Right.
And
Right.
if I have to go out into the herd and say, I like that female, I am a very visual person. I like her phenotype. I like her to have the wedge, larger rump, smaller towards the front. But we found that size isn't the key. We found that phenotype isn't the key. It's just a matter of if she's big enough to get pregnant.
Okay, let me re-ask the question and come around the back way. What would that cow look like in your herd, the successful cow that became pregnant? Describe that cow to me that fits your environment, likely to last in your environment, likely to turn the profit. Just I heard you describe the breeds, etc., but I'm more interested in hearing what does that animal look like?
So what we're starting to see, and we've only been doing this since 2014, but what we're starting to see is just what she said, a cow with a wedge that starts big at the back end and becomes smaller at the front end. And they're going to be weighing between, because I know this is what you want to know, is what do they weigh? They're going to be weighing between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds, mature weight. That's generally the cow that settles out, that makes it into the herd.
And what about its body condition score? What's your thoughts on what that animal would look like mid-season through the grazing program?
Okay, so in the mid-season, in the summer grazing season, they're all going to be 5s and 6s. If they're not, they're old or there's something wrong with them. Now, through the winter, I don't want you to come see my cows because they're going to be 4s and 5s, probably an average of 4.5. Because we're calving late enough, they have time to put condition back on before they give birth, and then they'll continue to put it on as they're lactating because we're into 18% crude protein grass at that point. Yeah. Okay, did we get there? Okay, cool. Good.
Did you go to the Ranching for Profit school? And if you did, what was the biggest thing you got out of it?
I should lie and just tell you, yes, we did. But no, we have not been through Ranching for Profit. It just really hasn't fit with everything else in our life yet. We did take a High Plains Ranch Practicum course from Dallas Mount. Dallas now owns Ranching for Profit. They're very similar, just a condensed version. The biggest thing that I learned from that course was the finances and how to do enterprise analysis. I think that's probably had the biggest effect on our operation. And then any of these things, whether it's this program or Ranching for Profit or High Plains, it's the networking, the people you meet in those schools and whatnot, like-minded individuals that you can bounce ideas off of and that will pick apart what you're doing. That's priceless. Yeah. So there's, in the back. He had his hand up in the back. Okay.
I was going to ask Melinda, did you do a podcast on working cows about the elk coming into your windrows?
Yeah, was it his podcast number 3, I think. Yeah, we talked about windrow grazing, and then the elk. He asked about the elk coming in and kind of how we mitigate that. So.
This is getting back to your weight of your animals, your mature animals. How much spread do you have on them? If you turn all the heifers out and allow every heifer to be bred, and that's your choice of picking heifers for the herd, do you wind up with a fire and ice type of herd where you got big and small for your cows, or are they pretty uniform?
It depends. We do have some extremes that make it in. We'll have some heifers that they come through and you're like, oh, this one's going to be open because she's only 650 pounds. And more often than not, those are bred. They'll fall out the next year, though. They just don't have the capacity to make it through a full winter. And at the other extreme, we'll have some heifers come through that are weighing 1,100 pounds. And I don't know how they get there, but they do. They'll be bred. And generally, those can go one of two ways. Either they mature really fast and they will make a cow the rest of their lives, or there's something not right, probably hormonal with those, and they don't breed again. That's where the real value in just letting nature take its course has played out for us. Is we don't know what's going on inside of those cattle. Why is she 1,100 pounds? Is it because she's an exceptional cow or because there's something wrong with her? And so doing it this way, we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about picking the wrong animal. Does that get to your question? Okay.
I have something. The Soil District sponsored a holistic financial planning course last year. Was it, Cindy? That's a tough concept to grasp. I've taken the course. Talk a little bit about planning your income in advance, because in the regular production agriculture model, that is totally foreign. And we had probably 18 people take it, or 14. And I'd like to take a survey and see how many are continuing to do it. But hats off to you if that, obviously you're doing it. Discuss that if you would.
I guess you have to pick a point to start. So when we're doing our budget, we just go through past production records, or not production, past expense records. We know who's getting paid what. We know who's going to receive a check that year. We know how much the power bill is. So you take the low-hanging fruit first. And then we'll start figuring out our income. We use like beefbasis.com. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but they'll allow you to predict, or they will predict out for you about 10 months in advance, and they're usually fairly accurate. So in January, I can get on their website, plug in what our calves weigh and what market they're going through, and they'll give me a pretty good idea of what we can expect to get for 425-pound steer calves the next October. Cull cow rates, plan for the worst, hope for the best, and so we'll just budget them at $600, which this year might have been too high, but that one's pretty much the same year in and year out, and we know that we're going to be 85 to 88% bred, so the rest of those are going to be culls. We know those numbers. That's pretty easy. What we don't know is what our hay is going to test at. So how much crude protein are we going to have to buy in? So you plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I don't know. I don't know how.
It's because it's totally foreign in our production system to actually plan for profit, because we're taught to what? Farming and ranching isn't profit.
It's a break-even business.
At best.
Yeah.
They'll tell us that.
Well,
but it's really not. But they'll tell us.
It doesn't have to be. It takes some creativity. And like I say, we set a goal, and I don't think we're going to meet our goal this year. you know, because markets didn't play out the way we thought they were going to. But some of that is, okay, do we need to run, we're running 650 head of cows. Do we have to run 650 head of cows this year if we're having to buy in a whole bunch of supplement? Or do we go ahead and sell some cows to meet a profit goal? You know, some years that might work, some years that might not.
Anything else for Melinda and Shannon? Well, thank you. Let's give them a hand.